Well, good morning. It is Thursday morning, and welcome to this episode of Repeatedly Revised. And today we're going to spend some time talking about what the Word has to say about forgiveness, and more importantly, about shrugging off the blame and shame that sometimes comes with our past or with our mistakes. And this is really crazy that this is the word today, because my husband and I were just having this kind of conversation last night about what it means to have forgiveness, and how do you believe that you've been forgiven and move out of that sticking point that you were at when you were in your sin. So how do you ask for forgiveness? How do you move ahead? And then the other thing we were talking about is, how do you get okay with God's forgiveness and knowing that you are worthy enough and you mean enough for God to forgive you. And those are tough questions. There's not an easy, quick Bible school answer to that. And we had a good discussion about that. But I sit down to open up my Bible this morning, and I've been studying the book of Joshua, and my chapter today was Joshua 5. Sure enough, this is what our subject is on today. So I think God wants this to be out there for you and for me. So just so you know, we do this, we do this live show a couple times a week. It's something fairly new, so we don't have a determined or set broadcasting schedule. Hopefully we'll be doing that here soon. We can set up exact times, but you can join us live and ask questions and interact and make comments. But this video will also be link to our website, where then you can watch it at your own convenience and follow along as we go through some of the great things God's trying to teach me and teach you and hopefully do in our lives. So so let's talk about Joshua chapter 5. So if you watched the last video, we kind of brought you up to speed on what's going on right now in the Bible. The Israelites, which were God's chosen people, were in slavery and bondage in Egypt. And God chose to pick Moses to be the man of the hour. And he led them out of slavery, of course, with God's help, and led them to what was supposed to be the promised land. However, because of their errors and their humanness and mistakes they made, God didn't let them get to the promised land as quickly as that he probably wanted them to. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and Moses ended up dying there before he got to get to the promised land. And so God called on Joshua to then fill that leadership role. And the book of Joshua begins with God calling him to take on that leadership position and to lead the Israelites into the promised land. And there's so many great things that come with that story and that calling. So in this chapter, in chapter 5, we pick up with the fact that Joshua has just left. They left the wilderness. Joshua's led the Israelites across the Jordan River, and they've now crossed over into the Jordan River. Now, if you read in chapter 3 tells us that Jordan River was huge, and it was a big obstacle, and it was also swollen because of all extra rain. So it was a big ordeal for them to cross it, and there wasn't any bridges conveniently located there. So God performed a miracle, and he pushed the waters back because of Joshua's faithfulness and the Israelites' faithfulness. He pushed the waters back, and they crossed over the river. And then, of course, once they finished crossing the river, the waters came back. So, that's not an everyday occurrence. And word got out that this had happened. And we pick up in chapter 5 where it says, when all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the Israelites until we had crossed over. And their hearts were melted, and there was no spirit in them anymore because of the Israelites. So all that to say that they got the news that this had happened. And they figured that the Israelites must be something really special, and their God must be really powerful if this happened. And they were really scared. They felt threatened. It was like, they're coming to knock on their door, and they were a little bit unnerved. So they're getting prepared. The Israelites are getting prepared to take the promised land. And these people find out, the Canaanites and the Amorites find out that, holy cow, they're coming, and they got a force behind them to be reckoned with. And God tells Joshua a couple of things to prepare them to go over and take the promised land. And in verses 2 and 3 of chapter 5, God tells Joshua that he has to make knives of flint to circumcise the male Israelites. And it specifically says to exercise a new generation of Israelites. And so basically what happens in the Israelite nation, and what was part of their custom, was that they were to circumcise male babies. And it was a ritual that was important for them to be different or set apart than all the other nations. It was something that not everybody did. So the Israelites did this, and it was something that was very sacred to their faith and their commitment to God. But as the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, they didn't stick with that custom or that tradition or that ritual. And most of the male, in fact, I think the Bible says all of the males that were a part of that journey had died. And so now we have new people, new men in the tribe or in the nation. And God says, hey, listen, Joshua, before you go into this, these people, these guys, they need to be circumcised. And so Joshua does that. And this was a test of their loyalty and their commitment and obedience to God. And it was kind of a way for them to sort of rededicate themselves to what God wanted them to be, which was different and set apart. So if you keep reading in the chapter, we get to chapter 8. And chapter 8 says, when they finished circumcising all the males of the nation, they remained in their places in the camp till they were healed. Yeah, you bet. This wasn't a quick recovery process, and there wasn't any ibuprofen around. So yeah, they had to take a couple of days to heal. Here's what I find really interesting about that. They just cross over this river. It has caused kind of a ruckus. People knew, the Amorites and Canaanites knew that the Israelites were coming. They were basically, on their doorstep. And they were camping, waiting to move forward and take over their land. The Israelites are kind of sitting there waiting. And the Canaanites and the Amorites know that they're coming. Yet Joshua chose to follow God's directive. And by circumcising the men, basically he immobilized and he put on hold the men that could have been the warriors if an attack had happened. So these guys know that the enemy knows that the Israelites are coming, and yet all of the men at this point in time are healing from being circumcised. So they couldn't have swung a sword or been able to fight or to defend themselves. So they were sitting ducks. And if there was ever a time that the enemy that was starting to get nervous, if there was ever a time for them to be able to attack the Israelites, it would have been right then. So I think, man, what an amazing act of faith. Number one, to step through that custom and go through with the circumcision, but also to be sitting right outside your enemy's gates, basically, and not be able to defend yourself. So often I think when we want God's forgiveness, we have to go through a process. It's not just we want it. We have to go through that process of rededication or recommitment or upping our loyalty. And it doesn't have to be something very ceremonial. It doesn't have to be a circumcision. Just a simple prayer does the trick. But we have to at least do that. It's kind of our job, our part of the process of getting that forgiveness and tapping into God's forgiveness. But then what I love in this example, just like the Israelites sat to heal and get prepared for days, and they had to have that faith that God was going to fight the battle for them if there was going to be a battle, because they weren't in a position to fight. There's almost this attitude of surrender. It was sort of this, we're laying down our ego, we're laying down our agenda, we're laying down the ability to fight for ourselves in surrender. And I think so many times as believers, when we need forgiveness and we ask for God's forgiveness, and we know that, there's still things that are happening in our world, in our life, that we want to pick up our sword and go to battle, and we want to tackle everything, and we want to be the fixers, and we want to be the ones that conquer our own enemies and our own struggles and the things that are standing in front of us. But the reality is that God isn't asking for that. He doesn't forgive us and then say, okay, now go take care of it. He forgives us and wants us to have that surrendering of our hearts, of our egos, of our own agendas, of our, I'll get it done, God, don't worry, just wait on me. No, he wants us to wait on him. And so it's an act of that surrendering that we see here, that it's just this so interesting, that at this moment when they could be going into the heat of battle, the Israelite guys, the men, are waiting to heal, and they're waiting and surrendering and waiting on God to be the one to tell them to move. So moving on into verse 9, the Lord said to Joshua, this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the name of the place is called Gilgal to this day. So what does that really mean? Rolling away the reproach means that God actually creates a moving off, a moving forward, a rolling away of the blame, the shame, the disgrace that the Israelite nation had sort of been under because of generations of wrongdoing. And I love that because it's not just forgiveness, but it's also new identity. It's also a new it's like putting on a new set of clothes, it's new. You're not living under that forgiveness, but I'm still going to make you feel guilty about it. Forgiveness, but you still have to wear the scarlet letter. Forgiveness, but you have to live under condemnation and guilt and shame. That is not the case at all. And this is what God is trying to tell Joshua and the Israelites, that no more are you under this burden. No more are you under this cloud, this label. You are now new, and because I'm affording you a forgiveness and grace, I am rolling off the reproach that was under you from Egypt. And so reproach means just that: blame, disgrace, or shame. And when God said he's rolling it away, I love it because it's rolling and it's an action word, and it kind of to me, when I see that, I think it's continually rolling away. Sometimes when we ask for forgiveness and we're dealing with some sort of guilt or shame in our life, it's really hard because the world wants to always remind us of that, and the enemy always wants to remind us of that. And sometimes it's hard for us to mentally and emotionally move past that. And it's almost a daily fight. I think what we want is for us to wake up one day and not have that problem at all, and for those burdens to not be there at all whatsoever, or the feeling or the sting or the blame of our wrongdoing to just be gone. We ask forgiveness and wake up and there we go. But we're human, and our humanness doesn't let us just let go so quickly, and the world surely doesn't let us go so quickly. And we're forced to live in a world that people love to find our faults, and people want to amplify that. But the rolling away, and rolling with the ing on the end of that, means it's continual. And it means that God is going to continue to show us his love, his forgiveness, his mercy. And it's on us to continue to look for that truth so that we can continue to move past the blame and guilt and reproach and the shame when it starts to creep up at us. And I love that because it's continual. And, I have things in my past that I know God has forgiven me for, but it is so easy for that to crop back up and be in my face. For those of you who don't know me, I had come from a past that was destructive in some ways, full of toxic relationships in other ways, and not healthy situations. And because of a compilation of all of that, plus wrong choices on my part, I ended up spending 9 months in prison here in Indiana. And with that, I know that God forgave me. And I know through that, God did amazing, miraculous things in my life because of that, and through that, and while I was there. But of course, being in prison, you come with the label of felon no matter where you go, what you do, and the world wants to remind you of that really quickly. And I come from a small town, and small town knows where I'm at and what I do, and that is something that they're always quick to remind me of too. And sometimes it's hard to move past the shame of that. Sometimes it's hard to figure out how to be me without letting that always be my stopping point, or my the label that I wear. Now, that's not to say that God doesn't just automatically wipe away all of our consequences for our bad choices and mistakes, but he does want to wipe away the shame and the guilt. And it's hard when society and the world wants to keep us there. And ultimately, it's the enemy, it's Satan, that wants us to remember not our not being removed from our disgrace, but he wants us to be reminded of the magnitude of our disgrace, and wants to continue to be the one to whisper in our ear and tell us how wrong we are, how undeserving we are, how less than we are. And the rolling apart means that every day we have to be proactive in overriding Satan's lies with God's truth. In the New Testament, the Bible talks about the renewing of our mind. And again, that's another ing word. So it is a continual action. We are crazy to think that we will pray a prayer tonight and wake up tomorrow and be completely different for the rest of our lives, when we are human and the world is ready to snatch at us. So the continuation of that and the day-to-day importance of that is so critical. And I have found that the best way to clear my mind of negative thoughts and the best way to clear my heart of negative feelings is to combat that with the truth in such a way that the amount of truth is so much more greater than the untruth that it has nothing to do but to die off. When I work with clients privately in my business and my coaching business, one of the things that we talk about is this old adage that there are two wolves that live inside of you. And you may have heard this little analogy, but it's really powerful. There are two wolves that live inside of you. One is positive, one is negative. Which wolf you decide to feed is the wolf that will continue to live. The one that you starve will eventually die off. So what that means is when you choose to feed into negativity and feed into blame and shame and this sort of destructive thought about yourself, because that's what the enemy wants you to think, when you start feeding that wolf, that's the one that gets stronger, and that's the one that has more power, and that's the one that can have more of a grip on you. But when you choose to feed the positivity and you choose to feed the wolf that's all about God's truth and love and forgiveness and grace and who you are because of him, that wolf gains strength. That wolf is the one that gains the new grip, a healthy grip. That's the wolf that then runs rampant and has the biggest impact, and the negative one dies off. But that doesn't happen overnight. It's a continuation of that. It's the rolling, it's the renewing, it's the constant every day. I'm looking for the truth. I am looking to feed that positive wolf. I am looking to feed the one of truth, and that being a continuation of what we do each and every day. So when people say, how do you live in forgiveness and how do you know you've been forgiven? Well, if I just relied on my own mind to do that, I would have doubts. I would be wondering, okay, does this really work? Am I getting this right? But the reality is that the Bible is truth. And when I read the truth, it impacts my heart. It impacts my life. It changes me. It does renew me. And that is the evidence. And that is the truth beyond what I can understand and comprehend. And so I challenge you today that if you're struggling with that and you're feeling like, I don't really know, first of all, if I'm worth that forgiveness, if I can have it, because it keeps coming back at me. And that's usually what gets us, because it keeps coming back up. It keeps bubbling to the surface. Are we still dealing with those emotions? Or we still have to deal with the people around us who know the things that we've done wrong? When that happens, it isn't that the fact that God forgave you is lacking and that it didn't happen. It's that your amount of lies that the enemy has fed you versus the amount of truth that God is trying to give you is off balance. And the more truth you have and the more truth you stand on, the quieter and the less effect that those enemies' attacks and lies have on you. And so I challenge you today that that's where you go get your strength from, and that you go forward looking for the truth, knowing that that is where your faith lies. There's an old hymn that says, "My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus's blood and righteousness." And the truth of that is this, that there's nothing more than Jesus's love for you and for me, the fact that he died on the cross for us, and the blood of that sacrifice is what gives us hope. It's what gives us righteousness. It's what allows the rolling off of our reproach to happen. It's what allows us to renew our minds and renew our lives. That hymn goes on to say, I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but only trust on Jesus' name, which means it doesn't matter all the feel-good stuff that you can try to put into your life, but it truly comes down to knowing Jesus, who he is, what he did, and trusting and believing that the truth he offers you and the forgiveness that he offers you does exist and is possible for you, for me, and for everyone who chooses to believe on him and to lean on him and to ask for that forgiveness. So that is my word for you today. I hope you find some encouragement in that. If you're joining with us live, look for this replay video on our website, revisionforwomen.com. You will find it under the Repeatedly Revised link on our website, on our homepage. And share this with someone who you think might benefit from hearing some of this. You can also find this probably on our Facebook page, Twitter, as you go forward into social media. Be on the lookout for it. So have a blessed day. Catch us on the next time we come around for good truth to help you overwrite the lies and live on the truth. Have a great day, everyone.